The cold was a physical weight pressing down, leaching warmth from bone and muscle. It seeped through the thin soles of her boots, crawled up her legs, wrapped around her like a shroud. The woods clawed at her with skeletal branches, ancient and indifferent. She was lost, utterly, devastatingly lost. The sun had bled from the sky hours ago, leaving behind a bruised twilight that quickly deepened into absolute blackness, broken only by the faintest shimmer of faraway stars through the thick canopy. Fear, cold and sharp, had been her only companion for days, a constant tremor beneath her skin, a metallic taste in her mouth. Hunger was a dull ache, a hollowness that gnawed, but the cold was the immediate threat, relentless and unforgiving. She stumbled over roots, her ankle twisting with a jolt of pain that stole her breath. A small cry escaped her lips, swallowed instantly by the vast, silent forest. She sank against the rough bark of a massive pine, tears freezing on her cheeks. 14 years old felt impossibly young to face this alone, orphaned and adrift, promised to distant relatives she'd never met before the wagon had overturned in the rapids, sweeping away everything familiar, everyone she loved. The grief was a dormant beast compared to this raw, primal terror of freezing, of simply ceasing to be in the crushing darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, was a monster approaching. Every gust of wind whispering through the branches sounded like mocking voices. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, a futile gesture against the biting air. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. She couldn't feel her toes. Despair, vast and suffocating, threatened to pull her under. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the memory of fire, of warmth, of a kind face. But the cold was too real, too immediate, pushing out everything else. She hugged her knees to her chest, a small, shivering ball of misery and fear at the base of the towering, indifferent tree. She didn't know how much longer she could fight the heavy lethargy that was starting to creep in, the insidious promise of warmth if she just let go, just closed her eyes for good. It was then, through the haze of exhaustion and cold, that she saw it. A flicker, barely visible through the dense trees, maybe 100 yards off. Fire. Or perhaps just a trick of the light, her mind playing cruel games. Hope, a dangerous, fragile thing, pierced through the despair. With a monumental effort, pushing against the dead weight of her limbs, she forced herself to stand. Every movement was agony. She had to reach it. It was her only chance. She stumbled forward, one careful, desperate step at a time. The pine needles slick under her boots, the unseen ground treacherous. The light didn't disappear. It grew steadier, stronger. Not a trick. Real. As she drew closer, she made out the faint scent of wood smoke. And then, through a gap in the trees, she saw him. A figure silhouetted against the small, crackling fire. He was large, cloaked, still. He didn't seem to notice her yet. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A wild bird trapped in a cage. Stranger. Potentially dangerous. But the fire was life. She hesitated at the edge of the clearing, a wraith emerging from the darkness, dirty, tear-streaked, trembling uncontrollably. The figure finally stirred, turning slowly towards her. His face was obscured by the shadows and the low brim of his hat. He didn't call out. He simply watched her approach. He watched her emerge from the darkness, a small, ragged shape hesitant at the edge of the firelight. He hadn't expected anyone. These woods, particularly this deep inn, were known for their solitude. Known, too, for the dangers they held, both natural and otherwise. He saw the way she trembled, the way her eyes, wide and dark in her smudged face, were fixed on the fire as if it were the sun itself. He saw the dirt, the tears dried on her cheeks, the threadbare clothes that offered little protection. A child, no older than 14, lost and alone. He remained silent, observing, his posture unthreatening but still. Years of living on the fringes had taught him that sudden movements, loud words, could startle something already half-wild with fear. He saw the calculation flicker in her eyes, the desperate need warring with deep-seated caution. She was weighing the fire against the unknown man. Slowly, Painstakingly, she took another step, then another, towards the warmth. She wasn't meeting his gaze, her focus solely on the flames. When she was perhaps 10 feet away, she stopped, clearly assessing him, the campsite. It was Spartan. A small, well-contained fire, a bedroll neatly tied, a saddle on the ground nearby. No sign of others. He still hadn't spoken. His silence was not unkind, merely present. Finally, he stirred, reaching slowly for a metal mug near the fire. The scrape of metal on stone was loud in the quiet. He poured water from a small pot into the mug, watching her the whole time. He didn't offer it to her yet, just held it, letting the steam curl into the cold air. It was an offering of sorts, a quiet demonstration of what he possessed, what she needed. Thirst was another thing gnawing at her, she realized. She swallowed hard, her throat dry and aching. He noticed the movement. He dipped a cloth into the pot and held it out, not directly towards her, but to the side, indicating the pot was hot. A simple gesture, practical, devoid of pity. Carefully, tentatively, she edged closer, her eyes still darting between him and the water. She reached a trembling hand towards the cloth-wrapped handle, her fingers brushing his only briefly. His skin felt rough, calloused, warm. She lifted the pot, poured a small amount of water into the mug he still held, then poured more carefully into her cupped hands, bringing them to her face. The warmth against her frozen skin was almost painful, a shock. She splashed it lightly on her face, the dirt smearing further. He watched her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. Then, he lowered the mug and gestured towards the space opposite him, across the fire. An invitation, unspoken. She hesitated for a moment longer. Then, drawn by the irresistible pull of the heat, she sank onto the ground there, closer to the fire. She held her numb hands out to the flames, feeling the glorious, intense warmth flood into them. It was a physical pain, like pins and needles, but a welcome pain, the feeling returning. He still hadn't spoken a single word. After a few minutes, he reached into a satchel and pulled out a piece of dried meat and a hard biscuit. He didn't hand them to her. He placed them on the ground between them. Again, an offering silently made. She looked at the food, then at him. Her stomach cramped with fierce hunger, but the ingrained caution, the fear of accepting anything from a stranger, held her back for a moment. But the hunger was too strong. Slowly, she reached out and took the food. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the meat to her mouth. It was tough, flavorless, but sustenance. She chewed slowly, deliberately. He still watched her, his presence a quiet weight in the small clearing. She ate the dried meat and biscuit slowly, savoring each tough bite, forcing it down her dry throat. He offered no further food, and she didn't ask. His silence was unnerving, but not hostile. He simply sat across the fire, occasionally stoking the flames or adding a small piece of wood. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she'd come from, didn't pry into how she came to be alone in the middle of nowhere in freezing weather. This lack of questioning was, paradoxically, more comforting than any words might have been. It felt like an acknowledgement of her plight without demanding an explanation she wasn't ready or able to give. She finished the food, feeling a small measure of strength return to her body, though the cold still gnawed. She risked a longer look at him now that the immediate panic had subsided slightly. He was a man of the wilds, clearly. His clothes were practical, worn. His face, when the firelight caught it just right, was weathered, lined, his eyes deep-set and watchful. There was a stillness about him, a quiet competence that was both intimidating and, she realized, reassuring. He wasn't an ordinary man. He felt part, like the forest itself had given him form. He seemed to sense her gaze and turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were a color she couldn't quite discern in the low light, but they held a depth, a weariness, but also a strange, steady calm. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. Just looked. It was a look that seemed to see through the dirt and the fear straight to something else. She quickly looked away, embarrassed, her cheeks warming slightly, a stark contrast to the biting cold. He finally broke his silence. His voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. "You need sleep, not a question. A statement of fact." He reached for his bedroll. She tensed, unsure what he meant to do. He unrolled it, revealing a thick wool blanket inside. He didn't offer the whole bedroll, but he separated the blanket. He folded it neatly and placed it near the fire, closer to her side than his own. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had. It was warmth, insulation from the frozen ground. She looked at the blanket, then back at him. A silent question hung in the air. Where would he sleep? He simply settled down on the ground beside his saddle, wrapping his coat tighter around himself. He intended to sit watch by the fire, letting her have the limited comfort. The gesture, quiet and sacrificing, spoke volumes. Chipped away another layer of her fear. Slowly, she shifted closer to the blanket. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and man, not an unpleasant smell in the circumstances. She lay down, pulling the wool around her thin body. It was rough against her skin, but oh, the warmth. It was a luxury she hadn't imagined possible hours ago. She curled into a tight ball, trying to conserve every bit of heat. Sleep didn't come easily. Her body ached. Her mind was still a whirlwind of fear and grief, and the presence of the silent stranger was a constant awareness. But the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows, and the blanket held the cold at bay. She watched his silhouette across the flames. He remained still, vigilant, a silent guardian in the night. Knowing he was there, watching, not with judgment or malice, but with a quiet, unwavering attention, allowed a fragile sense of safety to bloom in the desolate landscape of her fear. She didn't know his name, or where he came from, or why he was here. But he had offered her fire, food, and shelter without asking for anything in return. In this brutal, unforgiving world, that felt like a miracle. She slept fitfully, waking often to the crackle of the fire and his quiet presence. Each time, she found him awake, watchful, adding a log to the flames or simply staring into the embers. As the first hint of gray lightened the sky, the cold intensified, a final, desperate grip before dawn. She woke shivering despite the blanket. He saw her stir and, without a word, pushed the mug of water towards her again, refilled and warmed. She drank gratefully. The silence between them stretched, comfortable in its lack of demand. As full daylight broke, revealing the stark beauty and harsh reality of their surroundings, tall, silent pines, frost-covered undergrowth, a thin layer of ice on a nearby stream, he finally stood. He moved with a quiet efficiency, packing his bedroll. She watched him, unsure what she should do. Leave? Try to find her way back alone? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. He finished packing and looked at her, his gaze steady. "Where were you headed?" His voice, though still rough, held a note of simple inquiry. No pressure. She hesitated, then mumbled the name of the distant town where her relatives lived, a place that now felt like a world away. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the terrain, assessing the distance, the difficulty. "That's a long way." Through hard country he paused, considering. He could simply leave her. He had given her fire, food, a night's shelter, more than many would do. But something in her quiet resilience, the way she hadn't broken down completely despite her obvious fear and hardship, resonated. Or perhaps it was simply that he knew what lay between here and that town: wild animals, unforgiving land, and sometimes worse men than animals. "I'm going that way," he said finally, his gaze meeting hers. It wasn't entirely true. His path was usually dictated by the seasons and the traps he set, but it was a path he could take. "You can ride with me, if you want to." The offer was simple, direct, without obligation. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his posture, at the land stretching out before them, vast and dangerous. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but the alternative, facing it alone, was unthinkable now that she had glimpsed this unexpected shelter. "Yes," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Please," a flicker, almost imperceptible, of something eased in his eyes. He went to where his horse was tethered, a sturdy, calm animal, and began to saddle it. She watched him, this silent, solitary man who had appeared out of the wilderness and offered her a lifeline. She didn't know if she could fully trust him, not yet, but she trusted the quiet competence she saw, the simple honor in his actions. He finished with the horse and turned back to her. "Name's Cole," he said, the closest he'd come to an introduction. "Eleanor," she replied, the name feeling strange and formal after days of being just lost. He nodded again, acknowledging the names, the tentative step towards connection. He mounted the horse, then reached a hand down towards her. It was a large hand, strong and steady. She hesitated for only a second before placing her small, trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, pulling her up behind him onto the horse. The horse shifted slightly under their combined weight, a warm, solid presence. She settled behind him, awkwardly at first, then tentatively wrapping her arms around his waist, holding on. His coat was rough beneath her cheek, but it offered warmth and stability. The days that followed were a blur of movement and silence. They rode through landscapes that were both beautiful and brutal, sun-dappled clearings, dense thickets, rocky hillsides, frozen streams. Eleanor learned to ride, or rather, to simply hold on, swaying with the horse's gait. Cole rarely spoke, but his silence was no longer unnerving. It was a space he inhabited, and she learned to exist alongside it. He pointed things out occasionally, a hawk circling high above, the tracks of a deer, the direction of the nearest water source, but mostly communicated through action. He made sure she had food, simple but filling. He found sheltered spots to camp. He built the fire each night, the centerpiece of their small, temporary world. He slept lightly, always alert. She watched him, learning more about him in the quiet observation than any conversation could have revealed. She saw the careful way he moved through the woods, attuned to every sound, every scent. She saw the lines of concentration around his eyes when he scanned the horizon. She saw the gentle way he handled his horse. She began to piece together a story about him, a man who lived by his own rules, independent and self-reliant, perhaps carrying his own share of burdens or a past he kept hidden. Her own fear slowly began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of security in his presence and a burgeoning, quiet determination. She was no longer just a lost girl waiting to be saved. She was a survivor, making her way forward. The trust that had begun as a fragile vine born of desperation was slowly, steadily, putting down roots. She started to anticipate his needs, helping gather wood, offering her small assistance where she could. He accepted her help with a simple nod. No fuss, no grand declarations. It was a partnership, unspoken but understood, forged in the shared necessity of the journey. They were nearing the edge of the deeper woods, the landscape beginning to show signs of human presence. A distant plume of smoke, a faint trail. But the dangers of the wild were not yet behind them. One afternoon, as they rode along a narrow, winding path, the horse suddenly reared, nostrils flaring. A low growl rumbled from the dense undergrowth ahead. A large wolf, gaunt and hungry, emerged onto the path, its eyes fixed on them, particularly on the horse. Fear, sharp and sudden, pierced through Eleanor. She tightened her grip on Cole's waist, her heart leaping into her throat. Cole reacted instantly, with a swift, fluid motion that spoke of long practice. He drew a rifle from its sheath on the saddle, the movement economical and precise. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. His body tensed, a coiled spring, but his voice was low and steady as he spoke to the horse, calming it gently. The wolf padded closer, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. It was a creature of raw hunger and instinct, pushed to desperation by the harsh winter. Cole raised the rifle to his shoulder. His aim was steady, unwavering. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, bracing herself for the sound. The shot echoed through the trees, deafening in the sudden silence. The wolf yelped once, a sharp, pained sound, and crashed back into the brush. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. Eleanor opened her eyes. Cole still held the rifle, his gaze fixed on the spot where the wolf had disappeared. After a long moment, he slowly lowered the weapon. He hadn't killed it, not instantly, but it was gone, scared off or mortally wounded. He turned his head slightly to look back at her. His expression was grim, but his eyes held that same steady calm she had come to rely on. He didn't need to say anything. His actions had said it all. He had faced the danger head-on, protecting her without hesitation. The last vestiges of her fear of him dissolved completely in that moment, replaced by a profound gratitude and a quiet awe. She was no longer the lost, helpless child he had found. She had faced the wild alongside him, witnessed its brutal reality and his quiet strength. She had survived. The journey wasn't over, the destination still ahead, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she wasn't alone anymore. Their shared silence on the path back to the world of men was different now, filled not with uncertainty, but with a quiet understanding, a bond forged in the heart of the wilderness. She had found not just a rescuer, but a protector, and in the process, she had found her own strength.